On August 6, 2010, a man skied toward the edge of K2 and never came back. No storm warning, no avalanche, no desperate radio call, just a clean line, a bold decision. And then, silence. Fredrik Ericsson was not reckless. He was Swedish, precise, methodical, a man who believed preparation could tame chaos. He had already walked away from K2 once, humbled but alive. This time, he returned with skis on his back and a single idea lodged deep in his mind. If I move fast enough, light enough, I can outsmart the mountain. But here's the question that still splits climbers to this day. Did K2 kill Fredrik Ericsson, or did Fredrik Ericsson finally believe he could outrun K2? Because what happened next was not a dramatic rescue, not a heroic last stand, not a chaotic disaster caught on camera. It was something far more unsettling, a calculated plan, a narrow margin, and one moment where physics, pride, and altitude intersected. Some say he fell. Others say he skied right into a mistake no human body could survive. And the most disturbing part, there were people on the mountain who saw the line he chose, who understood instantly what it meant, and who knew before anything happened that there would be no second chance. This is not a story about bad luck. This is a story about confidence sharpened to a knife's edge, about the thin line between mastery and misjudgment, about how the most dangerous thing on K2 is not the weather but certainty. If you're here for comforting myths, this channel isn't for you. But if you want the truth cold, quiet, and unforgiving, you're in the right place. This is K2 Stories. And this is the final descent of Fredrik Ericsson. Fredrik Ericsson did not grow up dreaming of fame. He grew up in Sweden, where winter is not a season, it's a language. Skis are not equipment. They are how children move through the world. By the time Fredrik was an adult, skiing was not something he did. It was something he understood. Friends described him as calm, almost quiet, a man who measured words the same way he measured terrain, carefully, with intention. He wasn't chasing applause, he was chasing precision. And that mattered on K2, because K2 does not forgive noise, chaos, or ego disguised as courage. Fredrik first came to K2 in 2009 with the same vision that would later define him: to ski from near the summit of the world's second highest mountain, not to descend on foot like everyone else, but to glide, to turn gravity into a controlled partner instead of an enemy. It didn't work. That year the mountain pushed back. Conditions deteriorated. The window closed. Fredrik made the hardest decision a climber can make: to turn around. No summit, no ski descent. Just a long walk down with an idea unfinished. Some climbers would have called that failure. Fredrik called it data. He went home. He trained harder. He refined his plan. He cut weight, studied angles, calculated slope stability at altitudes where the human brain slowly loses its ability to reason. He believed that if the variables were reduced enough, K2 could be approached like a problem to solve. By the summer of 2010 he returned. This time he was faster, lighter, more confident. The team on the mountain that season noticed him, not because he was loud but because he wasn't. While others argued over ropes and schedules, Fredrik moved deliberately. He waited, he watched. He chose August 6th as his summit push. The weather was not perfect, but it was acceptable on K2. That's often as good as it gets. Above Camp 3, the mountain narrows, slopes steep, and a mistake here is not a slip, it's an equation with only one answer. Yet Fredrik continued upward with skis strapped to his pack, oxygen thinning with every step. Some climbers questioned the plan quietly. Skiing on K2 was not skiing in the Alps. The angles were sharper, the snow unpredictable. One bad edge catch, one hidden patch of ice, and momentum becomes executioner. But no one stopped him. Because on big mountains, responsibility is individual. And belief, once internal, is nearly impossible to interrupt. As Fredrik climbed higher, he crossed into a place where confidence feels like clarity, where doubt becomes inefficient, where turning back starts to feel irrational, even dangerous. He reached a point below the summit where the mountain drops away in a terrifying, clean face. This was the line he had imagined for over a year, and standing there, with the world falling away beneath his boots, Fredrik Ericsson prepared to do something no one had ever done on K2. What happened next would last only seconds, but its echo would never leave the mountain. Above 8,200 meters, Time behaves strangely. Movement slow, thoughts narrow, decisions feel clean even when they're not. This is the death zone, a place where the human body is quietly dying even when everything feels under control. Oxygen starvation doesn't announce itself with panic, it arrives as confidence, as certainty, as the belief that now is the moment. Fredrik Ericsson stood near the top of K2 with skis still strapped to his pack. The summit was close, painfully close, but skiing from the absolute top was never the plan. The angle above was too broken, too steep, too exposed. He intended to climb a little higher, then descend to a precise starting point, his chosen line. The slope below him fell away at over 50 degrees, clean, unforgiving, final. Other climbers watched from a distance. They didn't cheer, they didn't warn him. On K2, you don't interfere unless asked. Everyone understood the math. At that angle there was no room for correction, no safe fall line, no recovery zone. One mistake would not end in injury. It would end in disappearance. Fredrik removed his skis, adjusted the bindings, checked them again. His movements were calm, practiced, almost ritualistic. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't panicking, and that was what unsettled people the most, because panic can be reasoned with, calm cannot. He clipped in. This altitude, even bending down spikes your heart rate, even standing still drains strength. Yet Fredrik took a moment longer than expected. He looked down the line he had chosen, not scanning wildly, studying it. The snow conditions were the great unknown. K2 does not offer consistent snowpack. Wind scours some sections to ice while loading others with unstable slabs. From above, everything looks smoother than it is. Depth perception lies. Shadows hide fractures. Skiing requires commitment. You don't step into it halfway. The moment the edges bite, gravity takes over. Speed builds instantly. Control depends on perfect execution. Fredrik pushed off. Witnesses later described it as smooth, controlled, almost beautiful. For the first few seconds everything worked. His skis tracked cleanly. His body position was balanced. He was skiing K2, something that was never supposed to happen. Then something changed. No one knows exactly what. It may have been a hidden ice patch, a wind crust collapsing under pressure, a micro miscalculation in edge angle magnified by speed. At high altitude, reaction time is delayed. Muscles respond slower. The brain processes consequences too late. Observers saw sudden acceleration, not dramatic, not chaotic, just faster than planned. Then the line disappeared behind a break in the slope. There was no scream, no flailing, no visible struggle. Just a moving figure that vanished into terrain. No one survives once control is lost. Silence followed. Climbers waited, seconds stretched. Someone expected movement below, a signal, anything. Nothing came. That's when understanding set in. On K2, falls do not leave bodies, they erase them. Rescue was impossible, even if someone had seen exactly where he went, which they had Antitha. Terrain below was a vertical labyrinth of ice, rock and void. No rope could reach, no helicopter could fly. Fredrik Ericsson was gone, not buried, not trapped, gone. And the most disturbing part wasn't the fall. That was how quickly the mountain returned to stillness, as if nothing had happened at all. On K2, death does not arrive loudly, it arrives as confirmation. After Fredrik Ericsson vanished from sight, the climbers above froze, not in shock, but in calculation. They scanned the slope below, knowing exactly what they were not looking for. There would be no slide trail, no broken gear, no sign that pointed to a survivable outcome. The mountain had already answered. At first there was a thin, irrational hope that he had stopped behind a rib of rock, that he had managed to self-rest, that maybe somehow he had landed in a pocket of snow and lived. But hope is fragile above 8,000 meters. Minutes passed, then more. No movement, no radio call, no signal flare, nothing. And slowly the truth hardened into certainty. Fredrik Ericsson had not crashed. He had exited the human story. This was the fracture, the moment when ambition finally snapped into consequence. Below the point where he disappeared, the mountain drops into a chaos of seracs cliffs and ice gullies that funnel downward for thousands of meters. A fall there is not a fall. It is a conversion from body to momentum, from presence to absence. The team faced an immediate decision: search or survive. On lower mountains, a missing climber triggers action. On K2, it triggers restraint. Every step downward costs oxygen. Every delay increases risk. And everyone there knew the same truth. Going after Fredrik would not save him. It would only add names to the mountain, so they didn't go. And that decision, logical, necessary, and brutal, would haunt them long after they left Pakistan. Word spread down the mountain quickly. Not through radios, but through posture, through the way climbers avoided eye contact, through the silence at camps that were usually filled with exhausted relief. By the time the news reached base camp, the story had already hardened into a sentence without punctuation. Fredrik is gone. No body recovery was attempted. There was no debate. The line he had taken led into terrain that had swallowed stronger climbers under easier circumstances. Even if his location were known, and it wasn't, the risk would have been unjustifiable. K2 keeps what it takes. What followed was not chaos but an eerie calm. Climbers packed quietly. Expeditions recalculated. Some turned around. Others continued, shaken but committed. This is another uncomfortable truth of high-altitude climbing. Tragedy does not stop the season. The mountain does not close, yet something had shifted. Fredrik's attempt forced a reckoning, not about skiing but about the invisible line between innovation and overconfidence. Between pushing the sport forward and pushing physics too far. Debate ignited almost immediately. Some argued he was a pioneer, that every advancement in mountaineering came from someone willing to step beyond accepted limits, that if Fredrik had succeeded, history would have crowned him a visionary. Others were less generous. They called it unnecessary. They called it arrogance. They called it a solo decision with collective consequences. Because when things go wrong at 8,000 meters, they don't stay personal, they ripple, they burden teams. They force impossible choices on others. And yet no one could ignore the preparation Fredrik brought. This was not a reckless stunt. It was the result of years of thought, training, and refinement, which made the outcome more unsettling. If this could fail, what does safety even mean on K2? That question lingered in the thin air long after the tents came down. Fredrik Ericsson did not leave behind a dramatic final message. No manifesto, no recorded explanation. Just a clean plan that met a brutal variable. The mountain had not tricked him. It had simply refused to bend. And in that refusal, K2 reminded everyone watching on the slopes and far below that progress on the world's deadliest mountain is not negotiated, it is tested. And sometimes, it is denied. Long after the season ended, Fredrik Ericsson's descent refused to settle into a simple explanation, because nothing about it looked wrong. There was no panic move, no visible mistake, no moment where observers could say, that's where it failed. And that is what made it haunting. In mountaineering, people cling to cause and effect. If someone slips, it's the ice. If someone freezes, it's the weather. If someone runs out of oxygen, it's poor planning. Tragedy feels survivable when it has a clear trigger. Fredrik's didn't. He prepared, he waited for a window. He chose a line deliberately. He skied with control until he didn't, and that gap, those few unseen seconds, became a vacuum the climbing world rushed to fill. Some argued the skis themselves were the problem. That no matter how skilled you are, skiing above 8,000 meters strips away your margin for correction. At speed, the body cannot react. At that altitude, the brain cannot improvise. Others pointed to the slope angle. 50 degrees on K2 is not steep, it's terminal on that face. Skiing is not a descent, it is a commitment to permanence. You are either perfectly in control, or you are no longer part of the mountain. And then there were those who said something quieter, and far more unsettling. They said Fredrik didn't fall. They said he skied exactly as planned until physics finished the sentence for him. That interpretation cuts deepest, because it removes the comfort of error. It suggests that sometimes, even the right decision executed well can still end in annihilation. That is the part climbers don't like to say out loud. Fredrik's disappearance forced a realization that innovation does not negotiate with altitude, that mastery on familiar terrain does not translate cleanly to the death zone, that above a certain point, the mountain stops responding to skill and starts responding only to gravity. His body was never found, not because no one cared, but because the mountain had already claimed it in a place beyond reach, somewhere below, among cliffs and icefalls that shift and collapse each season, Fredrik Ericsson became part of K2 itself, reduced, redistributed, erased, and yet his presence lingered. In conversations whispered at base camp, in plans quietly abandoned, in the hesitation of climbers who looked at steep lines and suddenly imagined speed without control. His attempt didn't inspire copycats, it inspired restraint. Years later, experienced alpinists would still mention him not with judgment, but with respect edged by discomfort, because his story didn't end with a moral victory or a clear mistake. It ended with a question no one could resolve. Where exactly is the line between courage and certainty? Fredrik crossed it believing he understood it. K2 responded without emotion, and that response still echoes because it wasn't dramatic. It was clean, final, unarguable. Fredrik Ericsson did not die chasing glory. That matters. He wasn't filming a stunt, he wasn't racing a rival. He wasn't trying to prove the internet wrong. He was trying to solve K2. And that is why his story lingers, because K2 is not a puzzle. It is not impressed by intelligence, discipline, or experience. It does not reward confidence the way lower mountains sometimes do. K2 only responds to one thing: limits. Fredrik believed limits could be refined, reduced, managed. He believed that with enough preparation, the mountain could be approached rationally, even elegantly. And in most environments he would have been right. But at extreme altitude, elegance becomes fragility, precision becomes vulnerability, and certainty becomes the most dangerous condition of all. His final descent did not fail because he was careless. It failed because the margin was absolute. There was no buffer left, no room for recovery, no space for the mountain to forgive. That is the lesson K2 keeps teaching over and over to anyone willing to listen. Not that ambition is wrong, not that innovation is foolish, but that above a certain point, human control is an illusion we temporarily borrow and eventually repay. Fredrik Ericsson reminds us that progress often comes from those who step beyond accepted boundaries. But K2 reminds us that some boundaries are not lines to be crossed, they are edges. And once crossed, there is no coming back. His name is now spoken quietly among climbers, not as a warning shouted but as a pause, a moment of reflection before committing to something irreversible. If this story stayed with you, it's because it isn't about skiing, it's about us. About how far preparation can really take us. About the moments when confidence becomes commitment, and about the price of believing that understanding something means controlling it. This is K2 Stories, where the mountain doesn't care what you believe, only what you decide. If you want more true stories, where decisions matter more than drama, and consequences speak louder than narration, stay here. Subscribe to K2 Stories. Because on this mountain, every choice has a weight, and some choices never come back down.